This is Metabolic Mastery, a core medical technologies podcast dedicated to advancing knowledge and practice in metabolic testing. Welcome to Metabolic Mastery. I'm Dr. Marc Humbert. This is my co-host, Dr. Cameron Garber. Today, we're going to be talking about periodization made simple. And so we're going to take kind of a big macro look at things. We're not going to go into some of the specific terms, you hear macrocycle, mesocycle, microcycle. We really want to simplify it down to what are the basics you need to know to make this effective and just make it a little bit more understandable. And so we're going to do a big zoom out to begin with. Cameron, let's talk about seasons of life.
Yeah, so just in general, I think we overcomplicate fitness, where we make it too unattainable for the average person. And so periodization is something that's a really important principle to make sure that we can stay fit and healthy and we're not overreaching in our fitness efforts. At the same time, let's not overcomplicate it and make it too difficult that people can't do it. And so, when we talk about periodization, there are seasons of our life as well as seasons in the year that change what our focus is of our fitness efforts. And so seasons of life, there are different periods of life where we have more or less time, or our time is more or less flexible. When you have young children, for example, or children in a lot of activities, your time changes versus when you're maybe an empty nester, or when you are in college versus when you get your first job. All of a sudden, your time freedom shifts dramatically. And so just lots of different seasons to life when different things are possible and different emphases are on our time. And so you have to think about, what season of life am I in? What's really attainable during this season of life? And then seasons of the year, as we're creating our overall plan for our health and fitness, we have to think, what season of the year am I in or about to be in? And what are the different training emphases that I want to do? So I love this concept of kind of zooming out and zooming in. We've talked about that principle a little bit on other episodes, but I love to help people think about, what's your 30-year plan for your health and fitness? Let's take a big zoomed out look at your health and go, who do you want to be 30 years from now? How do you want to function? What do you want to still be able to do? What are the activities and events that you want to have accomplished in this next 30 years? And so when we zoom out like that and we say, okay, this is who I want to be, how I want to be. I still want to be able to put luggage in an overhead bin. I want to be able to get on and off a tour bus, or, hike that mountain, or whatever it is.
Have you ever been on a tour bus? I don't think
I don't think. Well, but my parents went on a trip to Europe, and they had to get on and off the tour bus, and that was one of their complaints, I guess, was there's a few couples that were there where it took like a team of people to get them down the stairs of the tour bus, and so it delayed the whole group because of how long that took. And I wouldn't want to be that person that's delaying the other 40 people on the tour bus because it takes me that long to get down the stairs. And so that type of an idea, I want to be fit enough where I could bound up and down the stairs like it's no big deal. And so, putting those seasons of life and saying, okay, what do I need to do now in my life to be that person then? And then also to zoom in one layer. So if that's my 30-year plan, zoom in one layer and say, what are the activities that I enjoy doing? Let's say it's cycling, pickleball, swimming, whatever those things are that I really enjoy doing. And then the seasons of the year with that as well. Like in the wintertime, I really enjoy downhill skiing and cross-country skiing. And I know Mark loves snowshoeing.
There you go.
So some of those things. Whereas in the summertime, I do more cycling or running or swimming or pickleball or tennis or volleyball or what.
Paddleboarding.
Paddleboarding.
Don't have that.
Yeah, got to have that in there. So whatever it is that you enjoy doing, taking that and saying, okay, these are the activities that I love to do. Zooming in one more time and saying, how, with my workouts, can I support the activities that I love to do so that I can then become that person that I want to become in 30 years from now? And so if my strength training, my cardiovascular training, and my, skill development training supports the activities that I love to do, I'll stay healthy, be able to stay in the game. And so that's honestly, from a periodization standpoint, that really does simplify it down. Of like, how do I support the activities that I love to do and then structure that based on seasons? So if we're coming into spring, summer, fall, my activities shift a little bit from the winter time. And so I go, how does my strength training and cardiovascular training and skill training need to shift from cross country skiing and downhill skiing to, pickleball and volleyball or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And so I may need a little bit more plyometric strength, some footwork and agility type training mixed in. Cardiovascular training may stay about the same mix, but I'll probably do less strength training because I can get outside and enjoy the outdoors a little bit more than in the wintertime. A lot of our training is indoor, and so I have a heavier emphasis on strength training during that period of time. And so that's kind of what we're talking about from a periodization standpoint that simplifies it down. Whereas there are all kinds of periodization strategies. If we're talking about event-specific things like I want to cycle in the Tour de France, your periodization for that is going to be much more complicated. But the principles of periodization, the reason why they periodize is so that they can peak at the right time while avoiding injury and over fatigue. And so some of those principles really still apply to even the layperson that's just the weekend warrior or the person that 30 years from now still wants to be fit, healthy, active.
Yeah. Well, it just gives a framework, and we've talked about this before, of that idea that if we want to meet whatever goal, right? I want to live a long, healthy life, then I need some amount of structure so that I can move in the direction of that goal. Otherwise, I'm just kind of training for nothing.
Right.
And so I think one of the really nice things about that is that doing it that way, right? Looking from that macro level more to the micro level gives us a really good filter.
Mhm.
These are the types of things that I'm going to say yes to. These are the type of things that I'm going to say no to.
Mhm.
And that goes for like the activities that we do, but also like, what do I say yes and no to in my lifestyle, right? I've got to say yes to good sleep, good sleep
Yep.
habits. I've got to say yes to fueling my body well. And I might have to say no to, hey, yeah, I'm not going to do that activity. Like, that sounds fun, but that's just not in my plan.
Mhm.
And so it gives us a filter to make some certain decisions a little bit easier. And I think another element to understand is going back to what you mentioned is like, can I get the stimulus for training and can I recover? Those are those two sides of the equation that we're always respecting.
Mhm.
And the training load, right? The cardio, the strength, plyo, whatever I'm doing, that goes into that stimulus equation. But then we also have to look at the recovery side of the equation and consider what are the other stressors going on in my life. Like you mentioned, maybe I'm in school versus out of school, or maybe I'm starting a new job. Right? There's so many different lifestyle stressors. We can have, again, poor sleep is a stressor.
Huge.
What are my genetics like? So for example, like my muscle fibers, do I have more slow twitch muscle fibers or more fast twitch muscle fibers? If I have a lot of fast twitch, then that means that I'm going to get fatigued easier, and so I might need longer recovery periods, right? Versus slow twitch. So those genetic predispositions can change things. So there's so many different things that kind of funnel into the stress that we're under as a whole, and we've got to respect that. And so again, that goes back to seasons of life, seasons of the year. What else is going on in my life that I need to pay attention to?
Well, and that kind of introduces the idea of, this is obviously a podcast about VO2 testing, right? How does VO2 testing play into periodization? So getting a good RMR value and a good VO2 value and VCO2. So looking at fats and carbs and all of the things for this period of life or this period that I'm training for is really, really helpful to redo those tests periodically so that you can reset where your numbers are or for specific activities. If I'm going to be training for a different activity, my heart rate zones for cross-country skiing, for example, are going to be different than my heart rate zones for running because I use different muscles and muscle groups, and the stresses of that activity are different. My heart rate zones will actually be quite different. So even with a triathlete, their heart rate zones on the bike are going to be very different from the heart rate zones of running because they are using very different muscle groups and they may be more conditioned for one activity than the other and things like that. And so getting testing done that matches what this period of your training is going to be focused on and emphasizing to redo those tests so that you can get updated numbers for this period is really important. And so that may mean that you're getting tested, 2, 3, 4 times a year or more, depending on how aggressive you are at pursuing that goal and things like that. So just to assume that your heart rate zone numbers are going to be about the same from year to year isn't necessarily true. They can shift with those different training cycles as we improve in our fitness or as we've detrained a certain area of our fitness. So if I'm running less over the wintertime, and I may be doing other cardiovascular activities, but if I'm doing the actual task of running less because I'm maybe out on the snow more, um, my ability to handle the impacts and load of running is going to shift a little bit. And so my heart rate zones are going to shift a little bit. It'll likely drop down a little bit where that zone 2 is, um, because handling the impact and the repeated impact of running puts additional stress on my body that I've got to kind of adapt to. And so those zones will shift for a little bit and they'll pick back up and you may get to where you were the season before. But the likelihood is if you haven't been doing that task as much, as much volume or whatever, then your zones probably have shifted and it's a good idea to retest.
Oh, for sure. Well, we always talk about how the only training that matters is training that you can recover from.
Yeah.
And so if I just try to go back to the level that I was doing,
Mhm.
then sometimes that can lead to that burnout, injury, fatigue. We've seen that happen so many times, right? I used to could.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So I worked with this athlete. He's an awesome guy. He took first in this mountain series. I'm blanking on what it's called right now. Anyway, it's like 8 different races all over the world where they just go to ski resorts and like climb the ski resort and summit on the top of the mountain. It's like these
Intense.
super intense races. So he never won any one race. He got like 6th and 3rd and blah 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 in all of these events, but he took first overall for the series.
Mm,
And so kind of fun that he did that. But then in the wintertime, he also does, he's a big Nordic athlete. And so he does a lot of cross-country skiing and goes and competes in that as well. And so he had a really good season of that. And the next year after he won the thing was going to get back into running and just had spent so much time cross-country skiing that was a big part of our conversation because he was feeling as he was getting back into running, he was feeling all of these niggles, right? All these, my ankle, my knee, my this and that. And that was a big part of our conversation is your machine is still well tuned, right? Like your heart and lungs and everything is very well tuned. But the impacts of running are just different than the no impact, cross country skiing. And so even though your muscles and whatever are still well tuned, and your delivery systems of energy are well tuned, the stress that it puts on your body to run instead is just different stresses, and so your body has to adapt to that, in terms of bone density, tendon stiffness, all of those things. And so we redid a test and took a look at that stuff so that we could optimize for that.
yeah. Well, so I think that's just drives us into how our body adapts.
Mm-hmm.
And what you talked about is like in general, his body systems are really well tuned up, but for the specific activity
Right.
of running, they need some work. And so this principle of specificity
Mm-hmm.
is what drives a lot of our training. And so again, what is the primary activity that I'm going to be doing? Is it running? Is it hiking? Is it playing pickleball? That's going to require different stresses, different adaptations. And so we want to respect that and respect what our body needs to accomplish the different tasks. And the cool thing about our bodies is they're super adaptable, right?
Yeah.
Across a lifetime. But again, it goes back to balancing stimulus for adaptation with recovery. And so we do need to overreach to a degree such that our bodies are like, oh, okay, well, the next time that we do that, I need to be prepared.
Yeah, that much stronger to handle those loads.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that's what we're doing with anything, right? Whether we're improving our cardiovascular system, our neuromuscular system, musculoskeletal, is we're giving our body the conditions that it needs to adapt to, and then it's making those changes.
Yeah.
And if
yeah.
we give it enough time and we give it the building blocks, right, so that we're fueling ourselves well, then our bodies can adapt to do incredible
Oh,
feats,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
We see people, just like the guy you're talking about, right? Running races across the world and like
straight up a mountain. I mean, the vert was unreal in some of
Intense.
those races. Like the amount of elevation gained was just wild.
was
When you
unreal.
think about that, I mean, a skier's the whole point is to get as much vertical drop as you can.
Yeah,
And so to run up that is intense.
it's just it's a different animal.
Yeah. Awesome.
Takes a different breed
Yeah.
to do that. But again, like we are highly adaptable, and so respecting those constraints, right?
Mhm.
That like we do need to push our bodies, but if we push them too often, too intensely, too fast, then that's where we get burnout, injury, and fatigue. And so really what periodization is designed to do is, again, balancing stimulus with recovery. And we're doing that by adjusting the volume of training or the intensity such that it drives the adaptations that we're looking for. And we're adapting in all sorts of different ways. So you mentioned, like, depending on the sport, we're maybe increasing our bone density.
Mhm.
We want strong tendons for multiple reasons. We want strong muscles, and we want our metabolism to be good at fueling the things that we need to do.
Right. Right.
And so I think this is one of the important key points, is that, like, to fuel the work that we need to do, our body is always switching between different energy systems, right?
Yep. Yep.
We can use, and the main two that we use, so we have kind of four different ones. The main two that we use are our oxidative system. Wait,
I'm like going through my head. Actually, anyway, sorry.
Anyway, so like the main ones that we use are our oxidative or our glycolytic. Oxidative is more geared towards fat burning. Glycolytic is carbohydrate burning, but those are better at fueling different intensities. So fat can basically fuel us all day long at kind of a slow to moderate speed. So that's like, I am tracking this gazelle across the savannah over the course of multiple days. Great.
Which Mark does all the time.
I do that just regularly. So much fun.
Yeah.
But our bodies are very well adapted to use fat as a fuel source to fuel that long-term activity. But when we need the high power, the quick movement, the speed, that's when some of those other systems really shine, right? So carbohydrate is a much faster fuel source. We've also got some substrate stored in our muscles, our creatine phosphate, and then actual ATP, kind of our energy currency, stored in the muscles. And so that's that really quick burst of effort.
Yeah.
But in considering what we're doing in our training is we're really training our body to be flexible at using those energy systems best.
Mhm.
If we can be really efficient and really flexible in what energy system that we're using, then we can go longer, faster, harder before we fatigue.
Yeah. Well, so one of my favorite tests to run, I do this on myself a fair amount because I want to see where I trail run. So sometimes I'm doing more climbing and sometimes I'm doing more just, ups and downs if I'm traversing a mountain instead of climbing the mountain. But so you'll have periods of downhill and uphill and whatever. So I like to see how quickly I recover my energy systems. And so I'll do a test where I start and I see where the limit of zone 2 is just running fast. And then I'll see what it is climbing. And then I'll kind of do a hybrid of the two. But part of what I'm looking at is how quickly after I do that do things normalize and I get back into a kind of my zone 2. So I push it just past my zone 2 and then recover. And then anyway, kind of a fun test to do, and seeing the recovery periods. And obviously, the more fit I am, the faster that recovery tends to happen in between where I get back to a good fat burn, back into my zone 2. And so interesting, when I'm less fit, my body is less adaptable, less capable of recovering that and getting back to where, it takes a longer period of time for my body to blow off all that excess carbon dioxide and get back down to where I'm burning fat effectively. Whereas the more fit I am, the faster my heart rate rises, the faster my heart rate comes back down, and the faster my metabolic systems adjust as well.
Yeah. Well, so I want to actually highlight something you said in there is on the trail, you're kind of doing that zone recovery test. That's actually something that we can do in the
Right.
clinic too with the cardio coach.
Yeah, so that's when I say I test that, I'm doing that on the cardio coach. And that's one of the fun things is the cardio coach has this long form testing mode. So you can do super long tests, really as long as you need to. And so sometimes that test, when I do it, it'll be, 45 minutes to an hour, 20 or something like that. Like I do a fairly long where I push and get past that heart rate zone, recover, do another push under different conditions and see under those different conditions, how long does it take to recover? Where are kind of those limits at? It's really like for a nerd, it's really fun to test those things and to look at what are my recovery rates so that when I'm on the trail, I have a better idea of like how I'm feeling versus what really is probably happening physiologically.
Yeah.
And so it gives me just that much more insight into where I can and can't push and things like that.
Well, and it can just help us fine tune that combination of objective results, right? We're finding out in the lab what's happening, but then the subjective, what is my rating of perceived exertion, right? My RPE. How does this feel? How effortful is this activity?
Yeah.
And being able to combine those and fine tune that really helps us learn to listen to our bodies in a way that's actually validated by the data. And so getting more precise with understanding like what's going on so that I'm prepared for whatever effort that I want to be doing.
Right. And so if we're doing that periodically, during our different phases of periodization, if we're doing that with our cross country skiing, with our running, with our cycling, or whatever our different activities are, it really does help us to understand if we have an event coming up, how hard can I push on this hill? How long is it going to take me to recover to get back into a zone 2 or whatever it is? Like it really helps us with our game planning of a race, so that we are dialed in for that specific event or activity, if we're getting that granular in our training.
Yeah. Okay, so you mentioned specific events, activities. Let's dive into kind of priority levels. So this is again a zoom out and zoom in, and we have kind of 3 main levels here. And so let's talk about what is our primary goal. And I think this actually leads us back to some of what we were talking about last week is like, what is the thing that I am training for? And then what's the process that I'm using to get to that?
Yeah,
get to that
exactly.
goal.
Exactly.
So talk about that primary goal.
So primary goal, I think we have a long-term primary goal and maybe some short-term primary goals. But long-term primary goal, like I said, for me, and I would hope most people, it's that 30 years from now, who do I want to be? How do I want to be? What can I still do 30 years from now? So short-term primary goal, though, may be an event or a race or a season or a trip or whatever that is. And so you've got your primary goal and then your secondary goal of what are the things that I need to do to get there, and then what are the day-to-day or week-to-week steps of getting there.
Yep. And so really for that, again, that primary goal can be anything, but those secondary goals are really going to be, I like dropping it into some different buckets, right? So do I have enough mobility to do the activity? Do I have the coordination
Right.
to do that? Do I have the strength? Do I have the power, right? Strength is, can I produce enough force? Power, can I produce that force quickly enough to do the activities that I want?
Yeah.
And in considering all those things, is the better that I am in each of those areas, I have tons of mobility, I can coordinate my movements well, I'm strong and powerful, that just gives me more options for movement.
Yep.
And so that actually leads to me being able to be more efficient in what I'm doing to conserve my energy and to protect against injury. If
Yeah.
I have more ways that I can move, then like let's say that I'm running and I start to roll my ankle on a rock. Well, if I have all of those domains, right? If I have mobility, stability, strength, power, then I can quickly react to that and adapt and keep moving and I don't sprain my ankle.
Yeah.
But if I have limited options in any of those areas, then I'm a lot more likely to sprain my ankle, injured. That takes me out of the training game. And so, really, we want to make sure that we're really tuning up our cardiovascular system, our musculoskeletal system, so that it can respond to whatever we need to do, and so that it's prepped for any situation.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, that what am I doing on the day to day, and that it kind of includes the element of cross training as well, right? Okay, my primary goal is I'm getting ready for this half marathon, and so secondary, I'm going to be doing this amount of strength training, I'm going to be doing this amount of cardio, and then hey, you know what? I'm going to throw in some time on the bike. I'm going to throw in some swimming. I'm going to throw in some other activities. One, so that it just keeps me engaged in what I'm doing.
Yeah.
I think that can just be a drag when we're like, oh, like I don't have room for any of these other things, and then the training just gets monotonous, that gets boring, and that actually makes it hard to continue, right? We don't have the
Right.
motivation to push through, and so having those different options, cross training, fun, recreational things just helps us to stay focused and in the game.
Well, and honestly, a lot of the kind of recreational things or things that we can do for cross training, it keeps it enjoyable and fun and keeps us engaged, but it also allows us to work on skill development and make us more well-rounded athlete. So my son is a very good soccer player, quite high level and things like that, but he's also a really good basketball player and all these other things. And so he recently just he's kind of in between seasons of travel soccer, and so he participated in a pickleball tournament, and it was really interesting to see him figure that out and play really well, and he did great. He played in 3 different divisions, and just he did a good job for never having really played pickleball before. But what I loved about it was to see how the skills from soccer translate over, but also how he's able to develop new skills, new footwork, new ability to figure out an opponent and things like that. That will translate back to improving his soccer performance by what he learned and the agility and other things that in playing a couple weeks worth of pickleball um, at a decently high level would train him to do. And so he practiced a lot with my wife, who's a 5'0" uh, pickleball player. She's pretty good. Played tennis back in college and all that stuff.
Pretty good.
Yeah, yeah, she's
She's awesome.
She's awesome. But so just fun to see that skill development. And so those types of things helped him to be more excited about going back to soccer and, keeping it well-rounded and not focused just on the one sport and activity. And I think that can give us those same benefits throughout life that if we, have the things that we're working on, but also give room to do other activities that we enjoy, allows us to stay more engaged with it and not so burnt out.
Yeah. Well, I love that point you brought up about it helped him to problem solve how to work with this new opponent. And I think that's an unappreciated aspect of doing those other activities is the cognitive aspect of it, right?
Totally.
Can I see things from a different perspective so that I have a greater appreciation? I have a different understanding. I've developed new problem solving skills.
Mhm.
Like that's all part of the skill of getting better. And so I think that's sometimes an underappreciated domain is that cognitive domain
Yeah.
of skill.
Yeah.
And so, no, exactly. And it's funny, your son is like one of my friends. He can play any sport and he's instantly like decent at it.
Yeah.
But it's because he's developed a set of skills that are transferable from sport to sport, activity to activity. And so certainly like as he engages in certain sports, right, you develop the skill more. Again, there's that specificity aspect of our training
Mhm.
that I've got to do, the specific activities involved in that sport or that activity to get better at them. But there are lots of things that are transferable, at least to a degree across different sports and different activities.
Yeah.
And so thinking about that can really help us to organize, what am I doing with my training? How do I get the most bang for my buck out of the training that I'm doing, the most transfer possible?
Yeah.
And so let's dive into some of that domain-specific periodization, strength, cardio, etc. We'll start with strength because that's what I was just talking about.
Yeah.
So again, really the big thing here is that principle of progressive overload. And progressive overload is that just over time, I progressively add more load on to what I'm doing, right? I get stronger over time.
Well, and progressive overload really fits any domain that we need to make it harder. We need to overload the system and then allow adequate recovery. But in overloading, that's what gives us the stimulus to adapt.
Yeah.
And so overload, but then adequate recovery.
Absolutely.
And so, progressive overload, super important. And so we definitely have seasons within the year where we're going to do that more than others. So like for me, I do more winter time is my, I'm trying to build strength during that time because I'm not outdoors quite as much. And so I try to build a lot of strength. It's my bulking phase during the winter time. And so, I'm trying to build more strength during that time. And whereas I'm trying to maintain strength through the rest of the year, so that I can leave enough energy to do some of the other things I enjoy doing.
Yeah. And I think we like to make, this goes back to what you said at the beginning. It's so easy to overcomplicate this.
Oh, yeah.
And all these different training regimes. And is this way better? Is this way better?
Right.
And this is like given your goals, giving the other stressors in your life, what trade-offs am I willing to accept for that?
Yeah.
And training is really a game of trade-offs. And I think we get over-focused on what's the perfect thing, right? If I want to build the most strength possible, do this. Well, like, that's going to be different person to person.
Mhm.
It's like, well, hey, I have, 8 hours a day that I can contribute to this, right? This is my job as it is for some athletes. Well, then there's a lot more they can do in the gym. There's a lot more focus they can do. They can really optimize in certain areas. But when someone's like, hey, you know what? I have an hour a day that I am confident that I can consistently do.
Yeah.
Okay, well, then we're probably going to make that training a little bit more time efficient. And so maybe we give up some of the strength gains, but over the long term, this works for them. They're able to be consistent and they build strength over time.
Yeah.
And so, what are kind of big things to check off in the strength domain? Having having a mix of compound lifts and isolation lifts. Compound is just big movements that are using multiple muscle groups, multiple joint complexes, squats, deadlifts, rows. Isolation is going to be like, oh, I'm doing a bicep curl or a tricep push down. I'm isolating that specific muscle group. But both of those are helpful for building strength over time.
Well, and it's thinking of what are my activities and what compound movements do I need for those activities and what isolation movements do I need?
Yeah.
So pickleball, we'll take pickleball, for example. Just
pull that one out of the air.
On the brain. We just did this huge tournament that our family hosts. And so anyway, it's on my mind.
It's actually, racket sports are a great example.
Yeah,
though.
Racket sports are one of the best, is in terms of longevity, best things that you can do. But so I'm going to need to stay low. So I need good ability to squat and, get those balls that are low at your feet and things like that. But I also need to be able to hit an overhead shot. And so I need to do more isolation activities for strengthening shoulders and whatnot, and more global activities like squats and deadlifts and things to be able to have good core, lower, what I call lower core stability, so that I can get low, maintain my balance, keep my weight more on the balls of my feet, so I can move forward and backward better and things like that. And so, compound and isolation exercises, but structured around what are the activities that I'm doing. Always having that kind of focus, and that may shift throughout the year. That your focus may shift a little bit. If you're going back into winter and you're doing more cross-country skiing or snowshoeing or whatever, you may not need as much overhead activity, but you may need more lower, stability more than brute strength or whatever that is.
Yeah. Well, and so having that lens again, acts as a filter. There's so many different exercise programs. There's so many different exercises to do.
So many.
And so when you're saying, okay, well, these are the activities that I want to be prepared to do. Okay, well, then these are the type of exercises that are going to support that activity. And that helps us filter that out a lot better. One thing that I want to talk about is, again, strength is specific. And so we develop strength in certain activities, right? If I just practice doing a heavy bench press again and again, I'll get really good at doing the bench press. But strength is also functional. What I mean by that is that strength is transferable across a lot of different domains. And so I think we sometimes get caught up in this like, oh, strength training should be functional. I better be, training the exact patterns that I'm going to be using in whatever sport. And that can be helpful to a degree, but often like the skill component of that is developed in doing those actions in the sport. If I just have a crazy amount of strength, that's going to help me in so many ways, right? Like if I am running and cutting and I just lack quad strength and control, it doesn't matter how skillful I am, I'm limited by the amount of strength that I have.
Yeah.
And so just doing those, like having those core lifts, right? Some of the powerlifting movements in there are really nice because they just help us develop a ton of raw strength in those major muscle groups. And if I'm just really strong, then I'm going to be better at all those different aspects of sport, right? If I'm going to be able to produce a lot of speed, I'm going to be able to produce a lot of force. I'm going to be able to, jump better. Like all these elements of sport, like have strength as a foundation. And so I think that's something to understand. And so like your strength activities, your workouts don't have to exactly mimic the movement patterns that you're using. Like just having lifts that target big muscle groups and help us get better coordinating will have a high degree of transfer to that sport. And then we're also practicing the skills of that sport.
Yeah, absolutely.
So next, actually one more thing sorry. Strength is my passion.
Right.
So targeting different rep ranges and load ranges is actually really helpful because it leads to certain different adaptations. So lower load, higher repetition can be really good for just kind of getting the form of that exercise down. And it's a little bit less, it's less hard on our joints and our connective tissues. The heavy load, though, is actually still good for those joints and connective tissues, especially for our tendons. It helps them to get tougher, right? And so they become more like so if you think like the little pen spring that you pull out, it's really easy to deform versus you pull on a trampoline spring, like that thing is tough. It's really resilient. So it can store and release a lot of energy, but it's also more resistant to breakdown, deformation than that little pen spring.
Right. So they call that tendon stiffness. And we hear the word stiffness and we think like, oh, lack of mobility because of stiffness. And it's not necessarily that. It's more it's resilience and ability to handle loads.
Yep. And to store and release energy. When I have really stiff tendons, then I just get to I store energy. And then when I do the movement, I release that energy. And so I don't have to use as much of like my muscle force. It's more passive, right? It's just relying on the elastic properties of that tendon.
Right. Yeah. The passive elastic component of muscle can actually fuel quite a bit of activity when our muscles are stronger and our tendons are stronger. We get a lot more passive motion out of that actually is energy sparing. So it improves our running economy and other things like that.
Yep.
So one of the huge benefits for cardio from strength training and why just improving strength training alone makes people faster and reduces injury rates.
Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah.
Super important.
Yep.
Okay. Now let's get into cardio. Two main buckets there. And this is really that aerobic base building and the interval training. So dive into that. Like let's talk 80-20 here.
Yeah. So 80-20 is such an important concept, and making sure that you're in the right 80% low base building zone 2 stuff and 20% in the 4 or 5 harder than I can currently sustain zones is really important. So go get a test done. Have your athletes or your patients get a test done so that they know their zones correctly. Getting that VO2 test done where they understand these are my precise zones, super important for being able to really progress well. Otherwise, if you're in the wrong zone, you may be trying to do the right type of training and you're just not. You're digging a bigger recovery hole than you can recover from typically. And that's why we see so much injury and fatigue and burnout with endurance athletes is they're typically overtraining for the base building phase of their training. And then they have less gas in the tank to really push as hard. And so we see plateaus, burnout, injury, things like that. And so super important to get accurate numbers and then follow the 80-20 principle really is, 80% base building zone 2 and 20% pushing harder than you can currently sustain so that we give our body the stimulus to improve that overload principle. And what they found is we only need to overload about 20% of the time for optimal injury free progress. You can make more progress more quickly at 50-50 instead of 80-20, but your likelihood of injury is pretty much imminent at that point at 50-50. And so you'll see if you look at elite athletes training plans, they'll be like 70-30 for a while, and this is periodization, 70-30 during a peak phase, and then the next week they may be 90-10, or the next, 2 weeks later or whatever will be 90-10 and then race week or things like that. So if they have a recovery week in between, or depending on the athlete and the race, sometimes they want to peak during race week so that they're like at top function. You run the risk of being a little depleted at that point in time. So it really just depends on the athlete and how your periodization plan looks. But that 80-20 training may look, you may be 95-5 the week after a big event. But when we look at kind of a training block as a whole, having that be around 80-20 is really ideal. And so if you have a 70-30 week, you probably want a 90-10 week after that, or things like that, to balance that out. But that's really important to have that balance between building your base and just putting enough load on the system that we maintain all of those adaptations and train our body in those fuel delivery systems. And then the 20% is where we're essentially telling our body, I need you to get better, and working on those high-end fuel delivery systems, the can I suffer, and can I process lactate well, can I do all of those things that help me perform at a high level.
Yeah. Well, again, this is one of the reasons that I love doing the metabolic testing is we focus only on that high end, right? I just want to push up my VO2 max. It gives us a good idea of how big the engine is, but it tells us nothing about the efficiency of that engine. How are they actually using, how are they mobilizing those energy systems to fuel their workouts, right?
Yep.
What's their fuel economy? And so being able to do that test and say, hey, like your capacity is great, right? Fitness overall is high, but you're actually not using fat well at all, right? You're not efficiently switching between your different energy systems. And so we're actually going to want to modify your training so that we can target this better and make you a more well-rounded athlete.
Yeah.
And so I feel like that's huge.
Yeah. So I tested a guy the other day that it was really interesting. So he was mostly a CrossFit athlete, but had been invited by a friend to run a half marathon. And so he was getting into running. And so we did the test. And when we tested him, he burned very, very little fat, like surprisingly little fat, because all of his training up to that point was high intensity, kind of mixed strength and cardio, and never really did any, low, steady, sustained cardio. So he's probably pretty good. He was able to stay anaerobic for quite a long time.
Good at
So
suffering.
yeah, good at suffering, but hadn't really developed this base of muscle system to be able to do sustained work. And so yeah, he was complaining of a lot of little niggles and injuries, my knee, my back, my this and that and the other, which makes sense if you're always in recovery. So when he was trying to build up his running, he just was always in this recovery state because he was only burning carbohydrate, which we just have a limited storage capacity of carbohydrates. So when we deplete that, your body craves carbs. He's always hungry. He thought he would lose some weight during this and wasn't really losing weight. And so pretty interesting to see by switching that up. We're going to do some more low intensity work. And he was surprised at how low his zone 2 was. And that will actually pick up pretty quickly. Like his zone 2 will grow pretty quickly when he does more of that low intensity work. But that was kind of the thing, is we said we got to separate the way you're doing your strength training and your cardiovascular training for a little bit. And so slow down what you're doing on the weightlifting side. Try not to have it be so, aerobic. And what was interesting is the cardiovascular benefit he thought he was getting from that really wasn't. His high end capacity wasn't that high. Even though he was able to suffer for a while, he still capped out at a fairly low heart rate and fairly low, level of performance on the VO2 test. So yeah, we'll see that change over time, and we'll see his capacity grow quite a bit now that we've kind of slowed him down for his zone 2 work, but then really sped him up on his zone 5 stuff. He's pushing much harder now. So
Yeah.
it'll be fun to see those changes.
Well, again, such an important thing is he now has more gas in the tank to push it hard on those high efforts. And so this goes back to this game of trade-offs. We're trying to balance stimulus and recovery. And if we're not doing that, right, you might still be able to push hard for a long time, but are you able to really optimize in the way that suits your goals and that suits your own body and the constraints on your time, energy, resources? I think that's the thing to understand, is that in a world with unlimited time and unlimited resources and an unlimited recovery ability, there's so much that we could do, but everyone's balance of those things is going to be a little bit different. And so
Right.
respecting those. And so it's like, well, again, how can I get the most bang for my buck? What can I do to optimize and respect the constraints that are on my, time, resources, etc. And so appreciating that really helps us to be careful about what decisions that we're making in our training.
Right. So to that point, so here we've got on our list like domain specific periodization. We're talking about periodizing our strength training, our cardio. Coming up next, we're going to talk briefly about plyo and skill development. It's like, man, when do I have time for all 4 of those things? Honestly, during my strength training sessions, I usually have one kind of plyometric exercise and one kind of skill development exercise, depending on what I'm training for during that period. So, and sometimes the plyometric exercise and the skill exercise are the same exercise. It's the same thing. But so when I come into the summer months, I do a lot more jump training because I know that I'm going to be playing volleyball, pickleball, tennis, some basketball, things like that. So I do more jumping and I need more explosive movements. Then during the wintertime, I'm doing more cross-country skiing, ski touring type stuff. And so I don't need to be as explosive. I need to just have a bigger endurance engine. And so that trade-off of I need to redevelop those explosive movements. And so I do more jumping, both plyometric and skill development type exercises.
Yeah. Well, so this is going to take us on a little aside, but I think this is an important point to bring out, is that I think the way that we often look at exercise limits our view of what's possible, because we think like, oh, okay, I've got, 3 to 4 days a week that I'm going to exercise, and I'm trying to fit it all into those 3 to 4 days a week. And so can we expand our vision of what's possible and what exercise looks like? And so one thing that I love about your family is that you asked the question, how did you move your body today?
Mhm.
I think that's such a foundational question. And like, there are days that I come up very lacking in the answer to that question. But I think, it's like, I think about adding more strength in or more this, and it's like, oh my gosh, I've got to add another hour or 2 hours a day in. And it's like, yeah, if we're trying to fit that all into 3 or 4 days, then that becomes a little bit more difficult to manage. But what if we just expand what we're doing in our week and we're just doing like we're doing more days a week, but it's just not so intense. It's not so long every day. Then I'm able to fit more in throughout the week, but I'm also not going so hard every day that I dig this huge recovery well. The nice thing about some of those things like the power, the high intensity cardio, like that isn't something that I have to do every day to get the benefit of. So high intensity cardio sessions, like 1 to 2 times a week is all that we need.
Yeah, depending on the volume of your training.
Depending on the volume of our training to make really good adaptations. And so, instead of, oh my gosh, I've got to have, 2 to 4 hours a day to exercise, like I can fit a lot into an hour each day if I'm just doing something every day.
Right.
And it doesn't always have to be like super, super structured. And so I think that's one thing that's helped. And so it's like, yeah, if I'm trying to fit all of my strength training and get everything in my whole body into 2 days, like that might be tough. My workouts might be really long, but if I can just do a little bit of strength training every day.
Yeah.
And again, different like that doesn't necessarily work for everyone, right? Different sports, different goals, different timelines, that might change. But I think that's a consideration that people can make to make that a little bit easier. Can I just do a little something every day instead of, I got to go hard on a few specific days?
Like a whole plyometric workout or a whole
Exactly. And two, the reason that I like this is I think it's really easy when I only have my workout on certain days to say, oh, I guess like I know I'm supposed to do a workout today, but I could skip it and then just get it in tomorrow, right? Is this the day that I work out? And then it becomes a decision every day versus like, well, I just do something every day, right? How did I move my body today? Then we're not constantly making that decision. It's just like, oh, that's just my lifestyle. I just do something.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
I know that's a little aside, but I think that can be a helpful way to make these things feel a little bit more accessible and a little bit easier to build into our lifestyle.
Right. Well, and we have to think about it from a standpoint of what's sustainable.
Yeah.
So oftentimes, if you think about it, adding 1 or 2 plyometric exercises into my workout versus doing a whole plyometric workout, will I see more gains in doing a whole plyometric workout? Yes, that would create a better load requiring more adaptation. At the same time, I'm probably less likely to consistently do that than just adding 1 or 2 plyometric exercises into my regular routine. I'm probably more likely to get that done and be consistent with it. And that's where we really see change anyway. If I have one really hard workout, but then I don't do a workout like that again for 2 more weeks because of the recovery that required or just because of the logistics of getting that done, then it didn't benefit me very much. Whereas if I can consistently do something, I'm going to see more benefit from that. And so, yes, we may not see as many, short-term gains, but long-term sticking with that, we're going to see more, improvement and preservation of skill and function than if I'm doing it haphazardly, sporadically throughout the year or life. If I'm doing a few hard workouts a month, but not really, part of my periodization plan, it's not going to give me the same benefit as if I consistently add things in and make it less of a big deal and more just part of the plan.
Yeah. So that brings me to another little aside that I'm that I'm going to make because I think this idea of consistency is just so important and so underappreciated.
Mm-hmm.
And again, this is really about that idea of trade-offs.
Mm-hmm.
I can't do everything, perfectly. And so what am I willing to trade off on so that I stay in the game for the long term, right? Like I might not get the best stimulus for adaptation, but I get enough that I am progressing over time. I'm not plateauing and I'm avoiding burnout, injury, fatigue.
Yeah.
And so this is a little side about looking at the research. So I want to be clear, we are so lucky to have the research that we do in terms of health and fitness, right? And to be able to design and control and then have the money to fund certain studies, like we're so lucky to have that, and we have had so many wonderful advances as a result of what's in the research. And so I want to be clear about that. One of the limitations, though, is that we do not have unlimited money. We do not have unlimited resources. And so there are certain things that it's really difficult to study over the long term because you can't control, like you put someone in a metabolic ward, right? What we call food jail. You can keep them there for a couple of weeks. Like, we don't have the money, and people do not have the motivation to say like, hey, I'm going to control what you eat and how you exercise over the next year, right? You're just going to be locked in this little room. We just don't have that level of
Yeah.
control. And so what happens sometimes is that we overgeneralize short-term findings to the long term. And so in this example of like high intensity, again, high intensity training, if we do a high volume of that, we're going to get more adaptation. But if we're only looking at the
Absolutely.
short-term studies, then we miss what can happen in terms of, again, burnout, injury, fatigue over the long term. What's sustainable and what allows me to be the most consistent over,
Right.
weeks, months, years.
Right.
And so when we zoom out and then we kind of pull in things from, well, what do we observe out in the real world, right? What's happening with, athletes over time? What's just happening with individuals who train in different ways? And what we find is, kind of going back to that 80-20 idea and what you said, is that seems to be a great balance of stimulus for adaptation and ability to recover and to stay in the game.
Mhm.
And so I think it's just this idea that research is so helpful. We've just got to be careful not to overgeneralize certain
Right.
findings from research and read more into it than the research is actually capable of covering.
Right. So an example of this is a couple years ago, HIIT training became super popular again. So you'll see this cycle of like a new study comes out about zone 2 training and a new study comes out about HIIT training and whatever. But HIIT training became very, very popular again a couple years back. And they cited all of these studies where it's like, look at these improvements, but they were all short-term improvements. And 6 weeks and all these gains in function and things, which is true, but long term, only doing HIIT training, we don't build a very good base, we don't build a very good ability to burn fat, and we have a much higher risk of injury. And so the sustainability of just HIIT training only what makes that somewhat difficult, especially to get enough training adaptation to really become fit and functional. So most of those studies were taking very sedentary people, doing that as a way to get them fit in the first place. Yeah, there's maybe something to that. Again, injury rates and things could confound that, and so it's more just stepping back and being what's sustainable, what are people able to sustainably do to make progress, and so are they as likely to do all these rounds of HIIT training that are fairly uncomfortable, albeit short. And so for some people that may work really well, and for others it doesn't. And so that's where using clinical judgment and seeing where that person's at and how they tolerate that. But in the end, some of these principles of they still need to develop a big enough base that they can burn calories well and things like that.
Yeah.
So
And that's going to serve them in the short term and over the long term.
yep.
Again, this is what's my long term goal? What's my long term timeline? And I think for most people, even if they have, some of those really focused short term goals, I think most people you talk to are going to say, yeah, like I would like to be healthy and functional, able, my whole life. When I'm in my 90s, I hope that I can still do the things that I love. I don't think there's people that are like, yeah, I really want to focus on this effort now. And like, if I'm 90 and I can't walk or do anything, like, it's fine. Right. Like,
Yeah.
I think most people, a broader long-term goal is like, yeah, I do want to stay healthy and fit and able as long as possible. And so being able to balance those different training regimes in such a way that it supports adaptation in multiple systems so that everything's tuned up, right? We have a really good aerobic base. We have a really good strength base. We have ability to produce that top end speed, that top end power. Like, that just makes us really well-rounded individuals so that we can continue to do a variety of activities safely and without getting injured.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, that
Well,
was
back to plyo.
back to plyo.
Plyo and skill. So essentially with our plyometric training, we want to do things that help us be able to be explosive and resilient as well with different sport specific stuff. So thinking about, uh, high impact activities so that we can absorb those forces both from an eccentric loading phase, but also that concentric explosive phase. Being able to do single limb activities. So running or stopping, cutting, things like that, and double leg activities like jumping or bounding or whatever that sport requires. Being able to have those skills, the power as well as the power absorption, so that we can stay healthy. Plyometrics, super helpful. And so making sure that those are part of your routine. Like I said, uh, I personally, to make sure I'm getting that in, just incorporate that into my normal workouts. But it really is super important for developing power, speed, and injury prevention. So many of our injuries happen. We're seeing such a huge increase in non-contact, cutting injuries where, guys are stopping to shoot a three-pointer and ACL gone, or they're, making a cut to accelerate in football and Achilles gone. And so much of that is being able to handle the forces um, with the body mass that some of these athletes have and things. But we also see that in just like, beer league softball guys running to first base and blowing an Achilles because that's the only time they've really sprinted in weeks, months, years. And so having that be part of your regular training, that you do sprints or you do explosive movements where you go from still to moving quickly so that your tendons can handle that. And it's pretty important.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't want to get cut out of your softball league
That'd
with
be
an Achilles tendon tear. Not fun.
what was I can't remember the show, but the lady would be like, "You are the weakest link, goodbye." but like
That's exactly what your tendon
right,
says,
that's what your
right?
Achilles says. I am the weakest link, goodbye. Right, but that is what happens. Like the truth is, when we're generating those forces, they have to be absorbed in some way, right?
And they're often like 3-4 times or more your body weight.
Or body weight, right? And so like the weakest link is going to give. If we haven't trained those areas, if we haven't trained those tissues, then they're not going to be resilient. And part of this training, right, of this strength and cardio and plyo and skill is this combination between like the mechanical movement and then how your brain is speaking to your different body areas and coordinating those movements and organizing those in a way that it can be really quick at responding and it can move the force to whatever structures can best handle that.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so again, this is the idea of options. If I have good mobility, if I have good coordination, if I have good strength and I have good power, then I have tons of options for movement.
Mm-hmm.
And so when it comes to I'm cutting, changing direction, I'm decelerating really quickly. Well, because I have all those different options available, my body can quickly move into the most efficient and safest one, and then I keep doing the game. Versus when I have limited options, then it's like, well, guess we're gonna sacrifice the Achilles. Guess we're gonna sacrifice the ACL. Like that's the best, that's the best option. That's the only option that this force can be funneled into and snap.
Yep.
And sometimes stuff like that just happens, right? We can't necessarily prevent every injury,
Right.
but having that really big foundation of a good a well-tuned cardiovascular system, a well-tuned musculoskeletal system is going to go a long way towards making sure that we're prepared for the demands of whatever activity, whatever sport that we're doing. Okay, yeah. So
last one is skill development.
Skill development, and this one is again, this is where we need that specificity, right?
Yeah.
What is the activity that I'm going to be doing, right? Whether it's pickleball or volleyball or basketball or hiking a mountain, whatever the thing is, like what are the specific skills that I need to do that? What do I need to be good at? And then making sure that I'm getting in regular practices of that. And just a high volume of practice is important there.
Yeah. So obviously if you're in a sport like practicing your, again, we'll use pickleball again, practicing your third shot drop or your drives or your serves or your whatever, practicing that's going to make you better at that. That really helps. So take a sport like trail running, passion of mine. Doing footwork drills is actually really, really helpful for trail running because especially as you're coming downhill and you're having to make quick decisions on foot placement as you're, avoiding big rocks and deciding which rock you're going to step on and things like that, so that you can avoid ankle sprains and just slipping and falling and slipping and falling is actually just part of trail running. Like, well, maybe not the falling part, hopefully, although that does happen too sometimes. But the slipping is pretty normal, that you'll like step on some loose gravel. Your ability to recover from that is really important. And so doing specific footwork drills so that when that one foot slips, that your other foot can adapt and make contact and you can pick that other foot up quickly so that you avoid the ankle sprain or the slip and slide and fall. Super, super important. And so that's something that I really try to think about and preserve is how to have those really quick, light steps that allow me to move quickly and adjust to the terrain really well. And so, that's a sport specific skill. So in your strength training and plyometric training and things like that, to do a footwork drill where you're hopping or making sure that you're getting accurate foot placements where your foot goes where you tell it to go, that can be really helpful in becoming a better trail runner.
Absolutely. Well, and you can make that very simple and you can make that more complex, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like maybe I'm just doing the footwork and now I add in some sort of cognitive demand, right? Someone's yelling at me or I have someone, throwing a ball at me to catch or something like that, right?
Or counting down by
counting,
by
whatever.
threes or sevens or whatever.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So
Yep.
lots of different ways to
Yeah.
do this. All right. So let's talk about again. So we've have an idea of what we should do in those different areas: strength, cardio, plyometric, skill. How do we adapt those to life? How do we know when we're maybe overdoing it? How do we know when we're underdoing it?
Right. Well, we just said, or the title of this is periodization made simple, and now we've made it really
I
complicated.
was just thinking that. We just talked about this for an hour.
Right.
And
But
so
it's simple. It's simple. No, again, it's taking all these principles, zooming out, saying what's the big goal, and zooming back in and saying, okay, what are the little steps that I need to take to get to the big goal? And so it really can, because we don't need to do it every single day. We don't need to do it like get it all done every single workout. Taking just pieces of it and working on here's a few strength exercises, here's a plyometric exercise, here's a skill-based exercise. Doing that in the same workout can really help. And then shifting those depending on the season of the year so that we can say, okay, during this season I'm training for pickleball, during this season I'm training for cross-country skiing. And so though the way those things look shift a little bit for those activities.
absolutely.
And so that's how we simplify it back down. It does take some like zooming out, zooming in, and some planning that we don't just like show up to the gym and go, what am I going to do today?
Yeah.
So there is some complication to it in terms of you would be best off having a plan. But you don't even necessarily need like, what are the 7 exercises I'm going to do today? It's more of, okay, what's my emphasis today? And then here are the exercises that I'm going to do to hit that emphasis.
Yeah. Well, and again, it's this idea of start with where you're at.
Mhm.
You don't have to have the perfect plan that's going
Right.
to just be best for forever. Putting this into action is going to be somewhat messy, and that's okay. It's a learning process, right?
Right. And it's more about the consistency of doing something until we refine that into doing the, quote unquote, right thing eventually. But that's a process.
Absolutely. 'Cause sometimes what's on paper, when we actually put that out into the real world, it's like, oh, that actually didn't work how I thought it would, or oh, I hadn't considered this aspect. And so just starting with something, and again, this doesn't have to be perfect. It's building that consistency over time, as you mentioned, and then just regularly reorienting, retesting, rechecking.
Mhm.
And so again, this is where we can again get you back in the lab and test you and say, okay, like, are we actually progressing, or are are we not? Like, do you have evidence of um, we're training too much, right? You're
Yeah.
not being able to recover.
Right. Your resting metabolic rate has dropped. Your overall calorie burn has dropped. Your zone 2 is smaller than it used to be. Those are signs that we're overreaching, overtraining, or that we're detraining. Things like that. So that's one of the reasons why I love a VO2 test, both RMR and exercise testing, is it allows you to, we call it our lie detector all the time. So it allows you to see, even though I think I'm doing these things, am I really? And so it really can help dial those in. Am I adjusting appropriately for workload spikes, for travel that I'm doing, for injuries and niggles that I may be having? Am I making those appropriate adjustments to my training so that I'm keeping things dialed in?
Yeah. Well, and being able to have enough flexibility that you can adapt. I think
Yeah.
this is one of the things that we see sometimes is, either one end there's really no clear direction or goal, and
Yeah.
so like people aren't making progress, or it's so dialed in, like I just have to be perfectly matched with this structure,
Right.
that then people train themselves into injury.
I see this with runners or triathletes all the time where they hire a coach, they get a training plan, and they follow that training plan out the window. It's like I'm vomiting, but it says I need to get 5 miles in today, or I'm super dehydrated. Yesterday I was cramping. It's really hot season of the year, but it says I need to run 8 miles today, and so I'm doing that come hell or high water.
Yeah.
And that doesn't always work. Just because your training plan says that doesn't necessarily mean that's what's going to give you the most benefit. And so being able to auto regulate, and have some intuition play into that, and adjust appropriately, I think is important, that we make adjustments and adaptations to our training plan based on how we're doing, what the life stressors are, things like that. So if you are working with a coach that is giving you a training plan, make sure they're getting a lot of feedback from you of like, hey, this isn't working for me, or I'm overtraining. It's harder to keep my heart rate in my zone. All of those things will help them be able to adjust. Maybe, 8 miles isn't what you need to be, and you'd actually have better recovery, better adaptation and growth at 4 miles for a couple of days because we're overreaching for whatever reason. And so you don't always have to follow that plan right out the window.
Yeah. No, just having the ability to adapt to life as it comes. And we sometimes hear the phrase like learn to listen to your body.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes we don't have enough data, we don't have enough understanding, we don't have enough fine tuning. That's actually not accurate.
Well, we lie about how our body's feeling to
Yeah.
ourselves all the time. So a great example is often, especially during the early summer when it starts to get hot and I'm not used to it, I'll be like, my legs and lungs feel great, and I'll go out on my run and I'll look down and my heart rate's way higher than it normally is at those same paces. I'm like, what's going on? It's funny that it surprises me so often, but it's just that it's hotter usually, and maybe I didn't hydrate well enough and things. And so I have to honor the fact that to stay in my zone too, it's going to be slower today because of the conditions, because of hydration or whatever. And so it's really easy to not make that adaptation and push through because, well, yesterday I could run at this pace. I did this, same workout and I was faster yesterday, but for whatever reason, I need to slow it down.
Yeah. And so just using some of that objective data,
Mm-hmm.
and then the subjective data, right? Like, okay, my legs and everything are feeling great, but my heart rate is saying
It's
no.
high, yeah.
Or, hey, like my heart rate is good, but I just feel super like burned
Blah.
out, super like I'm
Yeah.
just going to slow down, or I'm going to do, a modification of this. Being able to just work in both of those, that helps us to fine tune and really learn to listen to our body better over time.
Yeah.
And that we're not just relying only on the subjective or only on the objective. We're
Right.
combining those in a way that it just helps us make better training decisions over time.
Yep.
Okay, so like we said, we said we'd make periodization simple, and then we talked about it for like forever.
Yeah, right.
Again, I just really like the analogy that Cameron gave of that zooming out and zooming in. Zooming out to make sure what are my long-term goals, what are the priorities that I want to focus on. Zooming in a little bit more, again, what's the season of the year, what's going to be changing across this year, and then what do I need to be doing on the day-to-day to support those long-term goals and the short-term goals, right? The activities that I want to do, the sports, the events. And so if I have kind of a strategy in each of those areas, then it gives me the stability of a plan, right? I know what my goals are at each of those levels, and then the flexibility for life to happen and for us to be able to adapt to it as it occurs.
Right. It's hard to change a plan and adapt to a plan that you didn't create.
Yeah.
Whereas if you have a plan, it's easier to go in and move things around and adapt for your life and lifestyle and what's happening right now in your life. So
yeah. And then at the end of the day, like we said in the beginning, really periodization is how do I balance training and recovery and do that consistently over the long term.
Yeah.
Because that's what's going to really give us the benefit over the time. It's that law of compounding. I just build on these things over time and move in small increments towards that goal sustainably.
Yep. So you can make periodization much more complicated, but for
just listen to this podcast again.
Yeah. So the idea is just simplify it for where you're at. And then, if you decide you want to go ride the Tour de France, you probably need a more specific and more complicated, detailed periodization plan for something like that.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Wonderful. Well, thanks so much for joining us. As always, remember to like, follow, and subscribe for more content like this. And we'll catch you next time. This podcast is a production of Core Medical Technologies. Ready to take your metabolic testing to the next level? Visit core.com to learn more about purchasing our metabolic test equipment.